Friends, thank you for being here today in the vast, rolling heartland of America, where the rhythm of life is dictated by the seasons and the fate of a family can be determined by the yield of a single harvest. A profound and unsettling quiet has fallen over the soybean fields. What if I told you that a single government policy could be simultaneously hailed as a long-awaited savior and condemned as an agent of financial ruin, all within the same industry? How does the fate of a soybean field in Iowa connect to a shrimp tank in Indiana and the strategic calculations of policymakers half a world away? This is not the peaceful silence of a dormant winter, but the anxious hush of a market brought to a standstill. It is a silence born from a conflict waged not with armies, but with tariffs and retaliatory duties. A modern trade war initiated under President Donald Trump that has placed the American farmer directly in its crosshairs. What was intended as a bold, strategic maneuver to reshape global commerce and protect national interests has instead created a deeply fractured landscape within American agriculture, cleaving its producers into two distinct and opposing camps. For one, the policy has become a devastating gut punch, a source of immense uncertainty, price volatility, and looming financial ruin. For the other, it is heralded as a long-awaited blessing, a protective shield against decades of overwhelming foreign competition. This is a tale of two farms, a narrative of survival and desperation that reveals the complex, often contradictory consequences of high-stakes global trade policy on the individuals who work the land. The central conflict pits the American soybean farmer against the economic machinery of their own government's policies. For generations, these farmers have stood as a cornerstone of the nation's export economy, their fortunes inextricably linked to the burgeoning demand of a globalizing world. Now they find themselves caught in a vicious cycle of tariffs and retaliation, watching helplessly as their most crucial market, China, vanishes before their eyes. The tools of their trade, the combines and tractors, sit under the weight of rising costs while the fruits of their labor, the soybeans filling their silos, plummet in value. Their story is one of a market in collapse, of a dependable economic engine sputtering out, leaving a trail of broken promises and mounting debt. Yet hundreds of miles away, in a different corner of American agriculture, a starkly different reality is unfolding. On indoor shrimp farms tucked away in states like Indiana, the very same tariffs are being celebrated as a lifeline. For these producers, the trade war is not a threat, but a form of deliverance. They have struggled for years to compete against a tidal wave of inexpensive imported shrimp. A market imbalance, they argue, was created by unfair trade practices and even past U.S. government programs that subsidize their foreign rivals. For them, the tariffs represent a leveling of the playing field, a chance to finally offer their fresh domestic product at a competitive price. Theirs is a story of resilience and hope, a belief that protectionist measures can indeed fulfill their promise of safeguarding American industry. These two divergent experiences coexisting within the same national borders and under the same federal policy illuminate the profound and deeply personal impact of a trade war that is anything but simple. To truly understand this divide, we have to begin with the American soybean crisis because it's a dramatic narrative of a fall from a great height. Historically, soybeans have been far more than just a crop. They have been America's single largest agricultural export, a titan of global trade. In the years preceding the trade war, the industry was valued at over $24 billion annually. The engine driving this immense economic output was China, a nation whose ravenous demand for soybeans, primarily for livestock feed, seemed insatiable. Approximately half of all U.S. soybean exports, a staggering $12 billion worth, made its way across the Pacific to Chinese ports. This symbiotic relationship formed the bedrock of profitability for countless American farms, a reliable and seemingly permanent feature of the agricultural landscape. That foundation began to crack and then shatter. With the imposition of tariffs in response to U.S. levies on Chinese goods, Beijing retaliated with surgical precision, targeting the very heart of America's agricultural export economy. A retaliatory tariff of between 20 and 23% was slapped on U.S. soybeans, a move that instantly erased their price competitiveness. The consequences were swift and brutal. The $12 billion market did not just shrink, it evaporated. Today, that once mighty flow of trade has been reduced to what is described as effectively zero. China, the world's undisputed largest buyer of soybeans, responsible for importing an astonishing 61% of the entire world's traded supply, issued a clear directive to its importers: avoid purchasing from the United States. This directive has manifested in a chilling market reality as the 2025 harvest approaches. In a typical year, the period between September and January is a critical window for forward bookings, when Chinese buyers pre-purchase massive volumes of the upcoming U.S. harvest. This year, that window has been met with an unprecedented and deafening silence. Not a single major pre-purchase has been made from an American supplier. The silence from the U.S. is contrasted by the flurry of activity in South America. Chinese buyers in a decisive pivot have secured approximately 7.44 million metric tons of soybeans from Brazilian and Argentinian farms for October delivery, a volume that covers nearly all of their immediate demand. The message could not be clearer. The global supply chain has been rerouted, and U.S. farms are no longer a stop on the main line. Analysts now issue stark warnings, projecting that if this market freeze continues through the winter, American farmers stand to lose between 14 and 16 million tons in sales. The tragic irony of the situation is that the very tariff policy pitched as a shield for American industry has backfired, becoming a form of punishment. The 23% retaliatory duty levied by China acts as an insurmountable economic barrier. Even in scenarios where American beans are on paper cheaper than their Brazilian counterparts, the tariff more than compensates for the difference. For a Chinese importer, the choice becomes simple and logical. It is easier, cheaper, and politically safer to turn to South America or Canada. The long-term damage of this shift is now being reflected in official forecasts. The United States Department of Agriculture has sharply downgraded its export projections for the 2025 to 2026 crop year, reducing the expected volume from 51 million metric tons to 46.4 million. And as the trade war drags on, many analysts fear that even this reduced figure may prove to be optimistic. For the American soybean farmer, these macroeconomic shifts are not abstract statistics. They are deeply personal crises unfolding at the kitchen table and in the barn. They are trapped in a brutal economic squeeze, pressured from both ends of their balance sheet. On one side, the cost of inputs continues to climb. The prices for fertilizer, seed, and fuel remain stubbornly high, while the tariffs on imported steel and aluminum have a cascading effect, driving up the cost of essential farm equipment and machinery. Tractor maker John Deere, a bellwether for the agricultural economy, reported that these higher tariffs would cost the company an estimated $600 million in 2025, a cost that is inevitably passed down to the farmer. On the other side, the prices they receive for their crops are in freefall, with their primary export market gone. A massive surplus of soybeans is flooding the domestic market, causing prices to collapse. The Chicago Board of Trade, the global benchmark for grain prices, shows futures hovering near 5-year lows. At the local level, the situation is even more dire. Cash markets in farming states are reporting a negative basis, a technical term with a devastating real-world meaning, after factoring in the costs of storage and transportation. Farmers risk selling their crop for less than it costs them to produce it. They are facing the prospect of working an entire year, only to end up with a significant financial loss. The historical data paints a stark picture of this price whiplash. In the 4 years prior to the first Trump trade war, the average price for a bushel of soybeans was a healthy $12.54. During the 4 years of that trade war, the average plummeted to $9.39, representing a staggering loss of $163 per acre. In the brief period of reprieve that followed, the price rebounded to an average of $1,359, an upswing of $208 per acre. Now, in 2025, the price is once again in collapse. The board price is around $1,021, but the local elevator price is as low as $979, locking in a loss of $172 per acre. As one farmer bluntly stated, the farmer can't continue to produce a crop below the cost of production. And that's where we're at. This economic pressure is translating into a profound human cost. The dream of passing the family farm down to the next generation is being replaced by the nightmare of foreclosure. Farm bankruptcies surged in 2024, increasing by a staggering 55% over 2023. For many, especially larger operations, farming 5,000 to 10,000 acres or more, the prospect of losing everything is becoming terrifyingly real. When a farmer secures a crop loan from a bank, they are required to collateralize everything they own, their equipment, the equity in their land, their family home, even their pickup truck. If they cannot pay back the loan at the end of the season, the bank can call in the auctioneer. The specter of a farm auction where a lifetime of work is sold off piece by piece haunts the rural landscape. This fear is compounded by the problem of rollover debt, where losses from previous years are carried forward. Many farmers are currently operating with between $400,000 and $700,000 of this carried over debt, a financial hole that becomes deeper and more impossible to escape with each passing year. Out of this desperation has come a clear and unified plea, a mantra echoed in diners and co-ops across the heartland: trade, not aid. The government has floated the idea of a bailout package for farmers, with figures of $10 billion or more being considered. But for the vast majority of farmers, this is not the solution they want. They are not asking for a handout. They are demanding access to a market. They are proud, hard-working producers who want the opportunity to sell the product of their labor on a global stage. The fundamental problem is that the American agricultural model is built on massive scale production and efficiency. U.S. farmers produce approximately 40% more grain and soybeans than the country can possibly consume domestically. Without robust export markets, this surplus has nowhere to go. The domestic capacity for crushing soybeans to make oil and meal is insufficient to absorb the glut. For the American soybean farmer, the equation is simple and unforgiving. Without exports, they cannot survive. What makes this situation even more alarming is the growing realization that this is not a temporary market disruption that will resolve itself once the political winds change. Instead, what American farmers are witnessing is a permanent structural shift in the architecture of global agricultural trade. While the U.S. has been embroiled in its trade dispute, its international competitors have not been idle. They have moved swiftly and decisively to capitalize on the opportunity, working to secure not just temporary gains, but long-term dominance in the global soy market. South America is leading this charge. Brazil, which had already been a formidable competitor, has now officially surpassed the United States as the world's largest producer and exporter of soybeans. It is capitalizing on its lower production costs, favorable growing conditions, and a government that is actively investing in expanding acreage and modernizing infrastructure like ports and railways to move its crops more efficiently to market. Argentina, another agricultural powerhouse, has boosted its own competitiveness by cutting its export taxes, making its soy meal an incredibly attractive alternative for international buyers. Together, these South American nations are not just filling the void left by the U.S. and China. They are aggressively expanding their reach, establishing strong trade relationships with buyers in Europe and Asia as well. Canada has also skillfully strengthened its position. While it may not compete on the same scale as the U.S. or Brazil in terms of sheer volume, it has carved out a valuable niche in the market for premium, non-genetically modified, non-GMO, and food-grade soybeans. These specialized varieties command higher prices in markets that prioritize quality and traceability, and Canada's reputation for high standards has made it a preferred supplier. Furthermore, Canada's participation in international trade agreements like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTP) provides its exporters with stable, diversified markets, giving them a level of resilience that U.S. farmers now overly dependent on a single lost market currently lack. At the same time, China is executing a deliberate long-term strategy aimed at reducing its reliance on all foreign imports, particularly from the United States. This is not merely a retaliatory measure. It is a calculated policy of self-reliance. Beijing is actively working to reformulate animal feed to require less soy meal, thereby reducing overall demand. It has set ambitious targets to raise its own domestic crop yields and is investing heavily in supporting its local crushers to process more of its own soybeans. Furthermore, the Chinese government is stockpiling massive strategic reserves of grain, creating a buffer against future market volatility and geopolitical disputes. This is not a short-term workaround. It is a fundamental restructuring of their agricultural and food security system. The new normal in the global soy market is being established, and the architects of that new normal are in Brasilia, Buenos Aires, and Beijing, not in Washington, D.C. And that brings us to something that might be even more damaging than the lost sales, the erosion of trust, and the creation of a new global playbook. For decades, the United States built its reputation not just as an agricultural superpower, but as the world's most reliable supplier. International buyers purchased American grain with the implicit understanding that contracts would be honored and that trade would flow freely, insulated from the whims of politics. That foundational trust has been shattered. The trade war has demonstrated that access to American agricultural products can be turned off like a spot, transforming food into a tool of geopolitical leverage. This has sent a powerful signal to the rest of the world, and especially to China, that dependency on the U.S. is a strategic vulnerability. From Beijing's perspective, the pivot to South America is not merely an economic decision, but a national security imperative. Relying on a single nation for a commodity as critical as soybeans, essential for feeding its massive population, is a risk that is no longer tenable. China's deep investments in Brazilian port facilities, railways, and agricultural technology are not short-term plays. They are strategic long-term commitments designed to create a more resilient and diversified supply chain, one that is not subject to the political volatility of a single trading partner. They are, in essence, de-risking their food supply from American political influence. This strategic decoupling means that even if the tariffs were to be eliminated overnight, the previous trade relationship would not simply snap back into place. China has fundamentally re-engineered its import strategy for a new era. This new playbook extends to America's competitors as well. Brazil and Argentina are not passive beneficiaries of the trade dispute. They are active participants in forging this new global order. They are signing long-term supply contracts with China and other Asian nations, locking in market share for years or even decades to come. These agreements provide them with the stability and capital needed for further investment in production and infrastructure, creating a virtuous cycle that further cements their position as the new anchors of the global soy trade. The U.S., once the default first choice for buyers, is increasingly being relegated to the status of a residual supplier, the one you call only when your primary, more reliable partners cannot meet demand. This is a catastrophic reputational fall from grace. This intangible loss is something American farmers understand at a gut level. For them, a business relationship with an overseas buyer was often more than just a series of transactions. It was a connection built over years, sometimes generations. They feel a profound sense of betrayal, not just by a foreign government, but by their own. Their government's actions have effectively severed relationships they worked their entire lives to build, sacrificing their long-term stability for what appears to be a short-term political gambit. The invisible cost of this trade war, therefore, is the loss of a hard-won reputation for reliability. Rebuilding that trust in a global market that has already moved on may be the most difficult harvest of all. But while the dust of this trade war settles over silent soybean fields in Iowa and Arkansas, a profoundly different story is unfolding on an indoor shrimp farm in Indiana. For producers like Carolina and Darrell Brown, the tariffs that have brought their fellow farmers to the brink of disaster are seen as a long, overdue, and necessary form of protection. Their experience provides a crucial counter-narrative illustrating that the impacts of a trade war are never monolithic. The challenge for the domestic shrimp farmer is one of scale and price. The American appetite for shrimp is immense. It is the most popular seafood in the country. However, over 90% of all shrimp consumed in the United States is imported. Annually, this amounts to a staggering 1.66 billion pounds of shrimp valued at over $6 billion, with the majority coming from countries like India, China, Thailand, and Vietnam. This flood of foreign-grown shrimp, often sold at prices as low as $7 a pound, has created a market in which domestic producers find it nearly impossible to compete. The Browns, who run one of the first indoor shrimp farms in the country, have faced an uphill battle from the start, losing nearly 1 million shrimp in their first year as they learned the difficult science of aquaculture. Surviving that learning curve only to be undercut by a deluge of cheap imports has been their greatest challenge. This market imbalance, they argue, is not simply a matter of free market competition. It has been exacerbated by past U.S. government programs that ironically provided funding for overseas shrimp production, effectively subsidizing their foreign competitors. For years, domestic shrimpers have been pushing for government intervention. In 2023, they won a small victory when the U.S. International Trade Commission ruled to keep existing anti-dumping duties on frozen shrimp from several of these countries. However, the volume of imports continued to surge for these farmers. President Trump's 15% tariff on shrimp from India, coupled with an executive order signed in April of 2025 aimed at protecting the domestic seafood industry, represents a tangible hope for survival. Their goal is not to eliminate imports, but to raise the cost of imported shrimp to a level that is comparable with their own fresh, locally grown products. They are confident that if given an even playing field, consumers will choose the higher quality domestic option. The tariffs, in their view, are the tool that can finally level that field. They are already seeing benefits as the policy allows them to better communicate the value of their product and build a sustainable business. Their dream of making Indiana the shrimp capital of the world is a testament to the idea that for some American producers, protectionism is not a flaw in the system but the only way to fix it. So, as these two agricultural realities play out, the political sphere remains mired in a stalemate. President Trump has made public and pointed appeals to Beijing, urging them to quadruple their soybean orders and framing larger purchases as a path toward shrinking China's trade surplus with the U.S. However, these appeals seem to fall on deaf ears as they ignore the fundamental market shifts that have already taken place. High-level talks between Washington and Beijing continue sporadically, but tangible progress is thin. Commitments made in previous agreements, such as the Phase 1 deal, remain largely unmet. The hard truth is that even if a new deal were to be struck tomorrow, the landscape has irrevocably changed. China has successfully diversified its supply chain, and it is unlikely to ever return to its previous level of dependency on the United States. In the face of this new reality, some farmers are exploring alternatives. Todd Westenfurth, the son of an Iowa soybean farmer, represents a new path. In Minneapolis, he has started an urban farm growing microgreens for local restaurants. His business model is small-scale, community-focused, and most importantly, tariff-proof. Because he is not dependent on the volatile global agricultural trade, he can set his own prices and build a stable, predictable business. While urban farming is not a scalable solution for the nation's vast agricultural output, it represents a spirit of adaptation and a search for resilience in an increasingly uncertain world. Ultimately, the crisis in the soybean fields is about more than just the fate of individual farmers. It is about the health and future of rural America itself. Agriculture is the economic backbone of these communities. It is a well-known axiom in rural economics that for every $1 generated in agriculture, an additional $8 are cycled through the local community. Farm revenue pays the taxes that fund schools and maintain roads. It keeps the local co-op open, employing dozens of people. It supports the machinery dealerships, the feed stores, and the small businesses on Main Street. In a town of 7,000 people, where the economy revolves almost entirely around agriculture, the collapse of farm income threatens the entire community's way of life. The last thing a farmer needs is more uncertainty. Their entire existence is a gamble against the weather, pests, and volatile commodity prices. To add the unpredictable whims of geopolitical trade disputes to this list makes planning for the future an exercise in futility. As one farmer described it, trying to decide whether to plant for next year feels like a game of Russian roulette. You spin the chamber and hope you get to play again. This profound uncertainty hangs over the heartland, a testament to a trade war that has created deep fractures, pitting farmer against farmer and threatening the very fabric of rural America. The final verdict on this high-stakes gamble has yet to be written, but for those living through it, the cost is already immeasurably high.